Now, I know what some of y'all are going through. You came here, you made it to church, feeling good about making it to church, feeling good about being here. You're among your people, praising God. And then you start scanning the audience. Who else made it today? And then there's something that we do. We look over here, and when pastor's there, it's feeling really good. Everything's right with the world. Some of you all this morning might have looked over there, saw pastor there. But wait, he's not wearing that thing. Oh no. Who's preaching? So you start scanning the audience. Okay. So I know I have kind of messed up the vibe this morning. And then, and by the way, I sit right here. I've been here about 50-something weeks a year. I'm here, okay? So you can't fool me. Now, some of you are sitting there and thinking, I could have cleaned the garage today. I came here to hear Richard. I could have stayed home and cleaned the garage today. Well, let me tell you, I'm one of you. I sit right over here. You would not have cleaned the garage today. I know you would not have cleaned the garage today. How do I know that? Well, let me ask you a question. When was the last time you woke up on a weekend morning and got up and just cleaned the garage? It never happens, right? If you're like me, by the way, all conditions need to be just right, okay, to take on something that big. You could have thought about it maybe, and you're walking along and Jerry Seinfeld's on or something, okay? Or then there's George, okay? So we won't get into that. So let me get into our message this morning. One of my favorite mentors, one of my favorite coaches says this: what is the most reliable predictor of what you will do next? The most reliable predictor of what you will do next is what you are now doing. Inertia, we call that inertia. So here we are, 40 days of generosity, and I think we can move to the next. We're now in 40 days of generosity. Okay, what is today, by the way? Today, 21, okay? Well, this is just too good for me, the fact that today is 21. Some of you all may have heard something. It says it takes 21 days to form a habit. Anybody ever heard that before? It takes 21 days to form a habit? Well, let me just tell you a little bit about that. We, in my office in Merritt Island, I've been going there for 20 years. Like many offices, we have a kitchen. And in the kitchen, I'm sorry if I'm going to turn around for a second. In the kitchen, we have a sink over here. We have a refrigerator here. And then over here, we have a nice big water container. Been that way for about 19 and a half years. Well, unfortunately, about 6 months ago, there was a leak in that water container. So they moved it from here over to here. Okay? Now, guess what I did Thursday? I did what I always do when I go to the office. I went in there, got my coffee cup, brought it to the kitchen, washed it out. I always wash it out. You guys do too, right? Okay. So I washed out my coffee cup, and then at the sink, and then the refrigerator's here, and I went right over here. After about 6 months, I'm still doing it. No, they moved it over here. Okay? I tell you what, it takes more than 21 days to change some of our habits. I've been at this thing for 6 months now, and I'm still not getting it right. Okay, so here we are, 21 days, and some of y'all are going, well, wait a minute, what's going to happen after 40 days? Well, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can have what I'm going to call a lasting generosity. Move to the next one, if you would, please. Okay, so one of our titles here is Living Open-Handed in a Closed-Fisted World. Move to the next one, if you would, please. So when I was here December 28th, I gave a talk kind of around this whole theme of New Year's. Things are, we're coming into a new year, and I was really trying to make the point that just because you change the calendar does not necessarily mean you're going to change. And I said this. This comes from a person by the name of Daniel Amen, written several books, studied at Oral Roberts University, and he said this: the first step to change is being uncomfortable with something in your life and then being willing to do something about it. Being uncomfortable with something in your life and then being willing to do something about it. Now, let me ask you, is there anybody here that's ever been, I'm going to say, uncomfortable and then willing? This is the participation part. Anybody here? Am I going to make you uncomfortable if I walk too close? I hate it when they do that too, okay? I'm going, okay, is the guy going to fall off? You see what we go through up here? Anyhow, anybody here ever been uncomfortable and willing? Yes, of course. I'm going to tell you a story about a time when I was uncomfortable and willing. The year was 1988. Now, I know I'm dating myself, okay? Robert, don't look down when I do this, okay? Please. Okay. He's thinking about what we were doing in 1988. No, that was 1987, cousin. I got better in 1988, okay? So anyhow, the year was 1988. We had phenomenal Saturday night services. How many of you remember the Saturday night services we had in 1988? Okay, so I'm sitting somewhere right over here. And this is not the time that we met, Gina, by the way, because we got a great story about that one too. But I'm sitting right over here. And it was probably at the end of the service. Pastor Lord asked us to really seek the Lord, ask him to show us what he had for us in that moment. And so I was there after 28 years of, we have a favorite song in our house, Robert. It's called I Did It My Way, Frank Sinatra. So after 28 years of doing it my way, I was feeling the effects. I was feeling the effects of trying to do it my own way, trying to run my own life. So I'm over here really hurting, in debt, feeling the effects of a broken relationship, crying out to God, asking him for relief, asking him for direction. And then, all of a sudden, there was a moment, and I'm going to tell you, it was kind of like a feeling, but it was really more than just a feeling. You could say, okay, I heard God. I didn't hear with my ears, but I definitely got a sense of something. It's kind of embarrassing to tell you if I were to put it into 2 or 3 words, I'm going to tell you what it was, okay? You're going to meet your wife here, okay? But I'm not going to say all that, okay? But that's really the sense of what I was really getting. You know, one of the names for Jesus is what? The Word. And after preparing for this message, I thought, how appropriate. Because it was only one, I'm going to say, word. But in that moment, I got it. In that moment, I really received clear direction. Anybody here ever had an experience like that before? Okay, it's amazing. You don't really need a lot of those in your life, okay? But I had that experience in that moment there. Now, by the way, little side note for just a minute. There's probably going to be a lot of side notes, I'm sorry. But anyhow, little side note for just a minute. I sit over here, and you guys know me as this guy with the bald head, okay, doing all this. Now, the choir knows me as a guy who's crying half the time, okay? I'm just going to tell you, if you ever see me in a service, or you all that are in the choir see me crying, I'm probably overwhelmed by the sense of how God fulfilled that vision. I'm sitting here, maybe my kids are with me, maybe they're off, in college. My wife is here, and I'm just struck and overwhelmed about how God did that for me here. So the word I got was, Randy, get plugged in here. Get plugged in at Park Avenue. Now, one of the ways we got plugged in at Park Avenue was joining a group, okay? So Pastor Lord invited me to join his group. And so I don't remember exactly how it all happened, but I got lined up to go to Peter's group. Now, the night that we were supposed to meet, there was a little bit of an interruption. And Pastor actually called me on the phone.
Randy, this is Peter Lord. Huh? Is this Randy?
It's Randy.
Randy,
yes,
Peter
yes,
Lord.
sir.
Listen, I'm going to be out of town, and we're not going to be able to have a group tonight, and they're having a social down in the gym. Why don't you go down there and meet some of the other guys in the group, okay? You hear? Thank you. God bless you. God bless you, man.
That was pretty convincing, right? Okay. I mean, when Peter Lord said, you know, we're not meeting tonight, go down to the gym, I'm going down to the gym. So that night, Monday night, I go down to the gym to meet some of the guys. I was there to meet some of the guys in the group. I don't remember meeting any of the guys. I don't remember that. But I did meet the girl. Okay. I did meet the girl. Okay. And the next slide will show you what I really learned that night, if they can get it up. Okay. They will get out. I learned this. Where God guides, God provides. Where God guides, God provides. If anybody's taking notes, that might be one worth, I'm not going to ask you to take a lot of notes, that one might be worth writing down. So, I'm going to tell you, I think I was pretty much drinking the Kool-Aid by then, okay? And Mary had been a Christian about 10 years. I'd been a Christian about a year and a half or two by now. And one of the things that I was really struck with was the phenomenal role models we had at Park Avenue. I mean, just take, for example, our original elders, Eldon Rayleigh, Danny Daniels, Dave Daniel, Wick Hoffler, Peter Lord, Bill Colley. Every one of these phenomenal men became my role models as I was being mentored. And around here, there was distinctly, and there still is, I'm just in it now so I don't see it as much, but there was a distinct culture here at Park Avenue. And if you'll put up the next slide, I'm going to tell you, it was what I'm going to call a kingdom mindset. And part of that kingdom mindset was love people, use money, not the other way around. Love people, use money, not the other way around. Now, where do you think that these phenomenal role models that I had, where do you think they got this mindset? Well, I'm going to tell you, you've probably heard it here. Sometime somebody was given a message, and they said, when you're in a church like Park Avenue, and somebody asks a question, guess what is usually the right answer? Jesus. I mean, I get them right all the time, don't I? You ask the question, I go, Jesus, and I'm right most of the time. That's where they got it. So let me just now tell a little story. Go to the next slide, if you would, please. So this occurred now. This is from Matthew. Matthew, as you know, was one of the 12. He was one of the most hated guys in all of Israel. He was a tax gatherer. But something happened, and he was changed. He became one of the 12. So Matthew is now an eyewitness, and he's telling this story. And first of all, he tells a story about what Jesus spent most of his time doing. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. That's what Jesus spent his time doing, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and also meeting the needs of the people. Move to the next one, please. So right after that, the next thing that happened, or at least the way it reads in Matthew's, the next thing that happened is as people are gathering around and following Jesus, now there are literally thousands of people following Jesus. And so they get to this place, we know it now as the Sermon on the Mount. thousands of people around. Jesus, I'm sure, got a sense now is a great time to kind of lay out some things. And so the Sermon on the Mount starts out with the Beatitudes. We had a whole series of messages on the Beatitudes. Blessed are they that. And then he goes on and gives us the Lord's Prayer. And sometime after that, Jesus talks about this. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, I just want to stop for a sec. By the way, when you're on this stage, you can read minds. Okay. And some of you, he's going to have so much to repair when I'm done. I'm sorry. He's got some work cut out for him. So I'm reading some minds. Some of you are thinking, the irony of a guy who, for a living, asked people to save money for retirement. He's up here now reading this, okay? So I'm going to tell you, if you're a visitor, and this is the first time you're here, you have hit the jackpot. You came here, you got a hypocrite talking about money, and everything you knew about church it seems like it's true, okay? No, in all seriousness, Jesus did make a very good case for saving for our future, but that's not what he's talking about here. He's not talking about here. He's talking about later. So where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Move on to the next one, if you would, please. And I love this. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, that is generous in Greek, your whole body is full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy or stingy, your whole body is full of darkness. And I love the way he closes this part. In today's times, he would just say, that would be really bad, okay? But I guess then they said, how great is that darkness, okay? But I think you're getting the point. Jesus is clearly giving us a contrast between two kingdoms, two ways of living, or in this, very simple, being generous or being stingy. Move on if you would, please. No one can serve two masters. Now, you know, Jesus created it all. It all started with Jesus. All wisdom begins and ends with Jesus. Period. End of story. And guess what he said? You can't serve two masters. No one can serve two masters. Period. End of story. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. You cannot put your hope in God and put your hope in money at the very same time. And I think that's really the point he was trying to make. You cannot put your hope in this and in this at the very same time. Move on, please. Therefore, I tell you, and I love this, the cure for anxiety in my New American Standard version. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than clothes and more than the body? And then actually, Jesus continues in the Sermon on the Mount, and he continues to lay this out in greater detail. And I didn't put it all here. It's funny because kind of towards the end, he kind of throws a zinger in there. He says, you of little faith. I'm not sure why he did that. Maybe I could get you to explain that. You're the theologian here. But yeah, he says, you of little faith. I'm not sure why that was there. Move on to the next one. So my mentors that I was describing when I came here to Park Avenue 28 years ago had this kingdom mindset. We said that the kingdom mindset came from the king, of course. And the answer in this church is always Jesus speaking, famous Sermon on the Mount. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And all these things, I like to say, will be added unto you. Doesn't it sound much more spiritual? Okay. All these things will be given to you as well. Seek first his kingdom, his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. That is what I believe my mentors did. I believe my mentors, the culture at Park Avenue, the kingdom mindset comes from this and other teachings from Jesus. Move to the next one if you would, please. So I kind of put a little model together. This is not perfect, but I think it's one way to look at it. My mentors started with what we're now calling a kingdom mindset. Now, with a kingdom mindset, you're going to naturally be living by faith. With a kingdom mindset, you're also in a process of becoming a steward. So there's really a contrast between being an owner and a steward, okay? With a kingdom mindset, living by faith, walking by faith, you really are becoming a steward. So a steward recognizes, wait a minute, I didn't set this whole thing up. I'm not God. Somebody else is God. I'm not. In fact, I can't own this. Somebody else can own this. Now I'm going to tell you, if I was going to come up with another title for this message, and I'm sure I stole this from somewhere else, it would be something like living right side up in an upside down world. We've heard that before, right? And that's part of what we're talking about here. We're talking about really a contrast between two kingdoms. We're talking about a contrast between two mindsets. And we're talking about how do we live right side up in this upside down world. Okay? So a challenge is that we have to figure out when to be an owner and when to be a steward. But as we're a steward, guess what naturally happens? Our hands just not automatically, but our hands naturally open. Now move to the next one. I was talking about the upside down world. Here's the challenge. We are living in that upside down world. And it starts with, I'll say, earthly thinking. We could call it a carnal mindset. The challenge, though, is as you have this earthly thinking or this carnal mindset, it creates fear. It creates anxiety. And then you also, again, seek to control. Now here again is the challenge. A lot of times we try to own the things we can't own, but then we also don't own the things we should own. And I'm not going to get off on this rant, but I will say that, for example, we should own our attitude. We should own our sin, but we shouldn't try to own stuff. Okay? So again, here's an example of how things are just upside down in this upside down world. But then this then results in what we're now calling closed-fisted, a closed-fisted way of viewing things. Continue on if you would, please. Now, if you say, you know what, I just came here to church. All this kingdom stuff, okay, you're just putting it on too heavy. So I'm gonna lighten it up here a little bit for you. I'm gonna make it a little lighter. Friday, I was at a conference, and at this conference, there's a book table. So I went around. I always love checking out the books and seeing what's popular and all that. And on the table was this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then the byline, Powerful Lessons for Personal Change. Now, the copy I have, it said over 10 million sold, #1 national bestseller. The one that I saw on the book table, the 25th year edition, 25 million copies. Now, 25 million copies, that's a lot of books, okay? So the author of this, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. By the way, I referenced some of our elders before. Dave Daniel loved this. You guys remember Dave, how much he loved this, all this management stuff and everything? One of my favorite books, Powerful Lessons in Personal Change. In there, Stephen Covey, the author who passed away about a year or so ago, describes what he calls an abundance mentality, okay? With an abundance mentality, you believe there's enough. The world produces enough, there's enough. And when you have an abundance mentality, then you recognize that when there's enough, I can win and you can win. Covey called this win-win. And then as you have this win-win mentality, you naturally are going to give freely. And then your world expands as you give information, as you give in relationships, if you give in resources, your world expands because of this mindset. Now, one of the things that I love about this, or that I love about any truth, is we do have a saying around here, all truth is God's truth. If anything is good, it came from God. Now, most people don't necessarily know that. I don't know if Stephen knew that when he was writing this, okay? But all truth came from God. And so God set this up. And I like to say God is the originator of the abundance mentality. I'm not going to go off on this other rant. But how about this whole thing about we're running out of oil? Okay, you've seen that. You know, the world's running out of oil, you know. I don't know if we're running out of oil, but I do know that God set up plenty and enough for all of us. The challenge is, if you go to the next one, please, there's this other mindset. It's called a scarcity mentality. And in the scarcity mentality, there's a pie. And the pie is only this big. And if you take a piece of that pie, then there's not as much for me. Okay? And with that scarcity mentality, it creates, among other things, I'm going to call win-lose. If I can win, you're probably losing. Or if you're winning, then I must be losing. Now, this is awful. Part of what it does is it causes us to now compare ourselves to other people. Look at how well that guy is winning over there. And then we spend so much of our time focusing on how they're winning and comparing ourselves to them and trying to be like them. Then we're not focusing on what we can be doing. Okay? So there's a proverb. And the proverb, it's funny because some of the proverbs are they're just observations about life. You know, so, I mean, you can read the book of Proverbs, but don't pick up the book of Proverbs and just take every one and make it a promise, okay? Because they're not all promises, okay? Many are promises, but some of them are just flat out observations. This very wise man is observing life, observing how God set this whole thing up. Sometimes he's amazed, by the way, as he's doing it. But he said, one man gives freely and has more. Another withholds unduly and comes to poverty. And when I think about that proverb, I think about this. Because in a scarcity mentality, when the pie is only this big, and if you're having some, I'm missing out, okay, then I'm going to naturally withhold what I have. And you know what happens? Your world contracts, okay? As you become more stingy, your world contracts. So maybe that's another way to view this. Let's move on now. Let's talk about how we develop some of these mindsets. So anybody recognize this iceberg? Does it look familiar? Maybe you saw it sometime back. Okay. So just a minute ago, in the announcements, we saw Peter Scazzero. That was Peter, wasn't it, Dan? Okay. So Peter Scazzero was on the video, and he was talking about something that we call emotionally healthy spirituality. Peter Scazzero has written a couple books. One of them that we studied quite a bit here a number of years ago was called The Emotionally Healthy Church, a strategy for discipleship that actually changes lives. So plug for Dan in Dan's class. Dan is going to be starting, you saw it in the Park Avenues, he's going to be starting a class around this topic, around the whole idea of emotionally healthy spirituality. Very, very practical teaching. So Peter says this, humans, like icebergs, have many deep layers below the surface. So there's a number of ways you can look at this. I would say, let's start by looking at it saying that above the surface is our conscious mind, what we can relate to. But all of that below the surface is our unconscious mind. And within that, by the way, there's a whole lot of emotion, okay? So if you're going, I'm trying to be more generous, but I'm feeling stuck, how can I get unstuck? Well, I'm going to mention a couple things, but let's move on to the next slide if we would please. Peter says, sometimes in order to go forward, you have to go backward, okay? And I think that's absolutely true in life. Sometimes you're stuck and you can't move forward because there's stuff down there that's holding you back. And you have to go back, revisit that, understand why it's there, and then I'll say in a minute, allow Jesus to come in to heal you. But let's talk about 4 ways that we get those deep feelings, or another way to say it, 4 ways that our minds are programmed. Number 1, your family of origin. So Peter says, one of the most influential forces in your life, period, is your family of origin. When we did emotionally healthy spirituality, Peter had us do what we call the genogram. Remember the genogram, everybody? Some of y'all? The genogram is where you actually lay out your family of origin. So Robert's my cousin, so we would put our grandfather, Papa Nani, here. We put our grandmother, and then we'd make some observations, or at least attempt to make some observations about their life. In the Old Testament, we hear and we know the sins of the forefathers pass on to the 3rd and 4th generations. So we know what took place in our family of origin is huge in terms of what has shaped us or what is down below the surface. Another thing, and this really ties in, is our early experiences. We have a puppy right now, okay? So we have a little puppy, a little Cocker Spaniel, and we're just kind of reliving the challenges of when somebody's young. But thinking about children and when they're young. When children are young, before, especially let's say the age of maybe 3 or 4, they are wide open. They are wide open and they're taking in just about everything. They don't have a filter developed to be able to say, no, this isn't true about me. No, this isn't right. So they're taking it in. And that's another way that we get programmed, or another way we take on these mindsets that are now causing us to be stuck. I love this other one sometimes. Emotionally charged events. What comes to mind here? Any of you remember seeing like a Western movie where they're branding the cattle? They take that iron, okay, they get it red hot or maybe even white hot. They stick it on the hide of the cattle, sear it right there. Or Robert teaches me how to cook on the grill. Robert's a great cook. And so he'll get the grill all ready, and he'll take a piece of steak. He uses his hands. He washes his hands, I think. I don't know. So takes that piece of steak and moves it just along on that grill to sear it, get those nice things. So when you think about that, you get that image in your mind. That's really what happens in your mind when there are emotionally charged events. Your mind gets seared, those deep wounds, okay? And then finally, the 4th way I want to highlight is repetition. Now, you guys don't believe in this. You don't believe in repetition as the mother of learning or anything like that. Let's try it out. The main thing is to keep the main thing. Oh, how many times did we do that? Repetition does work. Okay, absolutely. So here are really 4 ways, many of them connected, of how we get, I'm going to say, programmed. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So Peter says, break the power of the past. Absolutely break the power of the past. And so one of my favorite scriptures, Hebrews 4:12, for the word of God. Now, I'm not sure if they mean like only the word as in the pages or the word, Jesus. They probably mean both. I'm not sure. The word of God is living and active and sharper than any 2-edged sword and piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit, of both joints and marrow, able to judge the hearts and the intention, or judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. God's word, whether it's us reading God's word, whether it's in a Bible study and somebody else speaking God's word, whether it's me up here and you listening. And then we have a story around here. You are him here, telling the story about somebody who described how somebody meant so much to them. In other words, the body of Christ together. Two primary ways to break the power of the past. So move on to the next one, please. So you might say, well, gosh, okay, I'm here and I know I'm supposed to not be in this kingdom, not serve money, but to serve God. I want to be in the right kingdom. How do I know how I'm doing? Well, one thing I'll say is, as you're thinking about this, ask yourself, what am I feeling? And in this moment, in fact, Jamie in our Sunday school class, Tucker pointed out when we were talking about this, this whole thing is not just in one area of your life. You can be a great steward in one area and then kind of mess it up in the other, So this applies to lots of different areas. Am I feeling anxiety in this particular area? Many times if you are, you're trying to be an owner. You're not being a steward. What am I doing? Okay, what are my actual activities? And then, who am I viewing as a source? What's the source of my hope? Is it my fancy car? Or is it God? Okay? Is it my checkbook or is it God? So, and then I also put down, which kingdom am I serving in this moment? Because the truth is, one moment we're doing phenomenal, and then the next moment we're messing up. So it's really not permanent. Okay? But it's well documented when Peter at one moment, had this great revelation, you are the Son of God, and the next moment, Jesus had to rebuke him. So clearly we can move from one to the other. But as we move in, let me go to the next one. Okay, actually back up to the last one for a second. I'm sorry. Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to close with some time of prayer, and I'm going to ask you to ask God to show you anything that He has for you this morning. Okay? So if you'll do that and just kind of meditate on these next words. So let's go ahead and take a moment. Okay, so He ended the Sermon on the Mount this way. Go to the next one, please. Just listen to these words. Therefore, if anyone hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain came down, and the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. So ask the Lord to show you specifically what He has for you, and I'm going to ask Richard to please come up and close us out. Richard?